Hi, everybody. This is Charlene Gatch. I'd like to welcome you to Women+Power's speaking series today with Karen Gallagher-Burt. Hope everybody is ready for some engagement today. We'll start with a notice here just to let you know that this session is going to be recorded and will be made accessible to the public. So your participation in any questions you ask won't be attributable to you. And from that perspective, you may notice this is a large scale platform. I think, Katrina, you may mention this as well. So you won't be seeing other attendees or participants, and any questions you may ask in the chat will not be made or available or seen by other participants. And then from that, your participation is completely voluntary and subject to the terms of this notice. We do respect the privacy of our members and our event participants, and we do have a privacy policy that's available on our website if you'd like to have a look at that. And just a note at the bottom here that when you do use applications, this information, your personal information, name, username, email address, and other information may be collected by the software provider and are governed by that software provider's privacy policy, in the case WebEx. And so today I have the pleasure of introducing you to your moderators, myself and Ms. Katrina Edgerton-McGaughan, counsel for DLA Piper and our chair of the Women+Power board, and Heather Treacy, partner from DLA Piper. I'm going to turn it over to Katrina, and Katrina will introduce you to supporters.
I'm happy to be here today on behalf of DLA Piper, who is the title sponsor of Women+Power, and who is very kindly hosting this session for us. We have another number of other sponsors and supporters to thank, notably, in particular, our financial sponsors, NMAX, ATCO, Black & Veatch, and Hardline Engineering. We've seen a lot more media attention, LinkedIn posts, and we've had a lot more conversations lately with folks who are really struggling right now, as the pandemic has been ongoing for such a long time. And I include myself in this struggle. So we are extremely pleased to be able to bring this topic to you this lunch hour. And I wanted to say, just don't be afraid to reach out and speak about how you're feeling to folks that you feel comfortable with. And we hope to be able to open that dialogue. Again, when Karen is finished speaking, there'll be room for a Q&A. No one will be able to see your questions. The only people that will be able to see them is us, and I will be the one reading the questions, which won't be attributable to you.
Thanks, Katrina. I wanted to, in terms of why resiliency matters, I wanted to put this slide up and just share some of the, as Katrina mentioned, some of the headlines that we've been seeing in the last year about the impact of the pandemic on our economic recovery, on women in particular. We know that women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Women have typically worked in sectors that were hardest hit in the economy, things like hospitality and childcare. Lots of discussion about the double shift that women take on a more or shoulder an additional burden, a domestic burden at home, managing children and schoolwork and whatnot when schools were closed. There's a McKinsey and Lean did a report that estimated that 1 in 4 women are voluntarily removing themselves from the workplace. And that headline to the right around women continuing to exit the labor force is actually from a research study that was done by RBC that estimates the loss of women in all sectors is about $1 billion to the Canadian economy. And the result of that is really how it's eradicating some of the gains that we had been making in the last several years, setting women back 5 to 6 years in terms of some of the gains that had been made. And that one in the middle here, a headline in the middle, the World Economic Forum estimates that it could take 99 years to close the gap and reach parity. And I'm hoping, I'm sure you all are, that it doesn't take us that long to get there, but we are, and it has been affirmed, and I think Forbes coined it, we're in the middle of a she-session. And it is real. And so some of the discussion that we wanted to have today is about, what the impact on women and what we can be doing to manage our mental health and changes that we can be looking to make in the workplace to support each other, one another. And from that, I will take it over to Heather and ask Heather to introduce our guest speaker today, and we can get going on this discussion.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Well, it's an absolute pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker today. Karen is the Director of Community Engagement with the Canadian Mental Health Association in Calgary. And her portfolio includes communications, fund development, and community events. Karen also has a graduate degree in social work and has spent her career focused on children at risk along with mental health. Now, Karen wears actually many hats but doesn't like labels. But her personal accomplishments include being a 37-year life partner, mom to 50 children, and counting as I understand it, community connector, political nerd, and mental health advocate. And I think we can all relate to this last one. She admits to having a complicated relationship with both coffee and wine that has been exacerbated during COVID. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Karen, and I will turn it over to her now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for introducing me. That was a great introduction. I always love when people tell about me having 50 kids and they think, oh my God, she looks so good for having 50 children. But all the gray hair here comes from my having many kids over the years. So to explain that one, I did not genetically give birth to 50, but the early part of my life with my husband, who has been very patient with me, I wanted 10 kids, he wanted 2. This was our compromise. I thought it was very good mediation. So we had genetically 2, 1 girl, 1 boy, and he said we have no more kinds to have. So I said, well, let's just take in foster kids. So we took in another 46 foster kids, and then 2 of my son's friends have lived with us over great periods of time. One has been here 8 years, and I'm quite happy to have him in the home. So yes, kids are a big passion for me. But as I've progressed throughout my career, and I'm a late in life social worker, I am one of those women who was not confident in my intelligence and capability for school and quit university 3 times before I was successful the 4th time, but I really understood then what it meant to be a social worker and why it mattered so much to me. And my favorite part about being a social worker is that in our code of ethics, one of the codes actually speaks specifically to the fact that we must speak up when we see something that in our society, in our systems is oppressive. And I think that's probably my favorite part because it gives me a license to be a shit disturber. And I'm okay with that as part of my profession. So I wanted to talk a little bit, and Charlene had been at one of my presentations, who we are at CMHA Calgary, just to differentiate us and so you understand. CMHA Calgary does community mental health. And what that means is we don't ask when people come to us to have a diagnosis. We are looking for people early on, hopefully preventative. We're supporting those on their journey through mental health. And then what we're also doing is ensuring that people have a place to go afterwards in their recovery and know that they're welcome and that the value of their experience can be something very important. So we have a peer program where we train people with lived experience. And I'm always proud to say that through that program, we've had a number of people come off AISH and be employed by us, by the Alberta Health Region, a number of areas, because we've given them power and we've empowered them in some of the work we do, and they've accepted to use their previous illnesses or experiences as a good thing. So that's kind of CMHA Calgary in a basic nutshell. So why do we talk about mental health? And I need to differentiate right away why I put this up here. When mental health generally comes up, most of our brains go to mental illness. And we right away go to diagnostics to people who might be struggling with depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. So really, statistically, 1 in 5 folks, 1 in 4, depending on the study, will have a mental health condition at some point in their adult life, maybe in their childhood. So 1 in 4 will experience that. But all of us, 4 in 4, have mental health. And we're trying very hard to switch the dialogue from identifying people by their illnesses and instead identifying them by their strengths and by the things they learn through this. So it's very important that you differentiate between mental illness and mental health. So let's start with that. We all have mental health, every single one of us in this room. And right now, probably struggling just a little bit. And I'm going to say that nicely because there's more to that. So it was mentioned before from Charlene about the economy hits for women particularly. And the last study I found on terms of what happens when mental health is not addressed and it moves into mental illness, the last study I could find was 2008. In 2008, it said that 51 billion is the cost to the economy by folks who are struggling with mental health and mental illness and leaving workforce, whether they're experiencing that absolutely I'm out of the workforce, or maybe they're just not present, that presenteeism we call it, rather than absenteeism. So there's a lot of that going on beforehand and continually right now. So put that in context about what it costs our economy when we don't support mental health practices. And that gives you a bit of an idea of the challenge we're all facing. So when I've been doing my presentations lately, one of the things I like to start with is really saying about how we're all experiencing this, how we're all having a mental health challenge right now, every single one of us. And the reason I like to put this up and talk about where we are is that there's an overarching kind of framework that there is for responding to disaster. And whether it be a flood we experienced in Calgary, the fires in Fort Mac, and what it might be a war, but mental or pandemic comes up there in that category. And in that, there are a number of stages that we go through as a society as we respond to it. So I love this chart. Sorry. I love this chart because it really gives you a good kind of overview of where we are in the mental health side of things particularly. So go back to just over a year ago. And I know in January last year, I was in Florida on vacation. In February, I was down in Texas for work. And then all of a sudden, we started to hear this COVID stuff. So there was a bit of a warning happening for all of us. This is the pre-disaster phase. And then we started to see the reality when things started to change. And I remember flying back to airports in Toronto and then back to Calgary, and I saw masks all of a sudden. And you're like, okay, this is a bit bigger than I thought. And I'm not sure about the rest of you, but March 13th was my last full day in the office because it hit. And away we all went home thinking, okay, what's going to go on now? So that was the impact component of it. And then things got a little easier. And we had what I call the hero stage, where I noticed in that first 3 months of the pandemic, my job in fund development was not as relevant, but my job in connecting other folks to our work was critical. We had dentists step up and give us all of their face masks and their gloves. We saw this hero side of things in our economy. And we've seen this before with the flood in 2013, how people pick up and assist. And over the summer, we had a bit of a honeymoon. We really had that time we could get outside, we could gather in small groups, and we were okay with this now. At this point, we're thinking, okay, we can get through this, it's not so bad. And then disillusionment kicked in, and the first trigger was September last year when our small humans went back to school. And when they went back to school, all of a sudden we had, as those of us who are parents were like, oh goodness, what does this look like? What's the school protocols? How can we deal with this? What are the kids bringing home? And there was a bunch of fear that kicked in. And over those trigger events, I would say went from September to about January this year. Some of it to me was politically induced, and I'm not blaming a party, I'm blaming a lack of a public health approach. That was something that we could all understand and that was clear and concise. Didn't happen. But all the way through until January, we've been up and down in this disillusionment stage. And I think it's going to continue just a little bit longer until we get to that point where we've got more of the vaccines taking place, obviously. But at that time, some of the things coming back in the world. So you look at that kind of chart, and the timeline works this way in this case with the pandemic. Everything from warning to the end of honeymoon was in about 6 months, 7 months, from March to September. We kicked off disillusionment in September. We're still here, and I actually anticipate we're going to be here for at least a full year. So we're going to be in this stage till at least September, and then we're going to start moving into that new construction phase. But you'll notice a couple things in there. Working through the grief is a big component of that. And that has been the recurring theme throughout 2020, that in mental health perspectives, every single one of us, everyone is experiencing grief and loss. It may be that extreme where you've lost someone to COVID, but it may also be that simple things like my kid didn't get to graduate. We didn't have a graduation ceremony. That vacation I had planned didn't happen. I haven't seen my parents in months, maybe a year. Everyone experienced grief and loss in different ways, but it's a universal fact that we all had it. And I think it's important to lay that out there, because lots of us in our heads kind of give ourselves hell or heck for that kind of, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm privileged. I have a job. I have this. I have that. But that doesn't mitigate the fact that you are experiencing a form of grief and loss exactly like everyone else. Of course, it's on a spectrum. And of course, some people's really is much more difficult than ours, but it's reality for all of us. But 2021 is going to be different. And the big focus for us is on these 3 R's. The resiliency, which we'll talk a bit about today, recovery, and I would say that's everywhere from personal to the economy. And a bit of, I think a lot of this is going on, and this ties into some of the women who are choosing to leave the workforce, that reevaluating and refocusing on what's important. And it's shifting a lot of us to some value-driven decision-making, which to me is actually kind of exciting as we look forward to what it looks like for all of us. So 2021 is going to be about resiliency and recovery. And I think that for me is the most hopeful thing about it. So when we talk about resilience, what is it? So I love to go back to the definitions. You know, it's an ability for a substance, object to spring back. You can read these. But for me, what the critical part is that it's the strength that you use to get through. So it doesn't mean you don't experience stress. Actually, we all do. It doesn't mean that you don't have things, you know, going wrong in your life. It's your ability or your capacity to deal with it and to move through it. And that's what's being stretched throughout the pandemic, and extraordinarily for women, we've had that extra layer. And I've often called it the mother load, only I spell load L-O-A-D versus L-O-D-E. It doesn't mean you have to be a mom, and there certainly are men that have this experience as well. I was in a meeting this morning with 5 other leadership folks in our field, and 3 of the women in that group, their husbands were laid off. So we were talking about how now some of us are carrying a different load in terms of being a primary breadwinner in our families and trying to make that work, when perhaps it's not only what's usual for us, but it's not really what we wanted. I know I've always wanted a balance, which really is unachievable, but I've pretended that that's what I'm working for, is a balance. And that's not happening so much right now. And I'm leaning towards more work and less life at home with what's going on for me. So think about it as you have adversity and you're able to bounce back from it. That's really what resiliency is. What I want you to know is it's not a fixed trait. It's not something you're born with or born without. It's a learned capacity and a learned skill. And the key factors of it are about flexibility, adaptability, and perseverance. And that's what builds resilience. So all of us are doing this right now. We're all building our resilience muscle along with our COVID 10 pounds. We're building that resilience muscle as we get through each and every one of these things that are going on in our lives. Again, very, very different for everyone. What you have to know is that this has nothing to do with, and I love this for students, particularly junior and senior high, a lot of the kids I've worked with or talked to, talking about that resilience changes, and it changes your thoughts and your behaviors. So it kind of ties into some theories around cognitive behavioral therapy. And it really is about using a combination of your intellectual abilities and social attributes that you have that can help you lower that stress response and cope with what's going on. So if that's my definition, I want to add a little to it and say that really for me, it's using those, exist when your mental processes and your behaviors promote your assets, your strengths, and protect you from the negative effects of stressors. You can bounce back and you can move forward through life's downturns. So I think we've all had experiences of some of those things, but COVID has given us a whole different expectation of what that looks like. So there's some basic things that we all need to support ourselves through this. And when I talk about resilience, I say, these are the things that I look for in people when I've done clinical work, and I don't do clinical anymore, but when I've done clinical work, what does your social support system look like? We know that those who have either close, immediate, or extended family, that help, because sometimes they don't. If we have community aspects around us, if you're connected with some sort of volunteerism or your local community, you have good friends and maybe some organizations that you're connected with, which could be workplace, then we're better prepared to handle it. It makes sense. Self-esteem is a really interesting for one, because you think about self-esteem as your confidence in your own strengths. And when you have this with resilience, it can help stave off that feeling of helplessness, which we often get in these difficult circumstances. I think the communication skills is pretty self-explanatory, but it really is about you being able to communicate about personally what's going on for you. And this ties into a lot of my favorite work. And when I speak to other folks, they're also doing the same reading and watching, and that's Brene Brown. And that's the work around vulnerability and that being authentically who you are. And being able to say, I'm struggling. And I really appreciated at the beginning when Katrina said that. And I will tell you that I too am struggling. I'm a high performer, type A personality, high energy personality. And I think I would say a very over optimistic person, not a Pollyanna, but I always can see the bright side of things and I can always see the end. And I haven't done so well with that during COVID, to the point where last August, my family outed me to our family doctor with my struggles. And I have been on some medication for the first time in my life to support my mental health. And I've seen therapists before. I'm a big believer in therapy. My lifestyle is very much about keeping myself mentally healthy, but all of those preventative factors and those protective factors didn't matter during COVID. And my biggest stress was how I could support the staff at CMHA, how I could support the leadership, all of us at CMHA, and then how do we support our clients, recognizing that most of our frontline workers are women. Many of them work multiple jobs in our group homes. They had to choose one because of the pandemic, and some of them left us, and some of them needed full-time hours. But the stress, the burnout, and I would say the depletion that's happening at that front line is something we have to pay attention to. And I've had a hard time with that because I feel like I can't do enough. So owning my own kind of responsibility on that. I think the other parts, the coping skills and the emotional regulation, make sense when it comes to being able to handle the overwhelm and being able to overcome some of the things that come with it. But it's the sense of overwhelm that we're all experiencing with so many things coming at once. I do want to touch on sort of the planning side of things. And people say to me, well, that really doesn't make sense when it comes to mental health. And my response is it absolutely does, because the coping skills and the communication skills all come into some of that realistic planning. And one of the things I have been teaching people and practicing myself is the ability to say no. Everybody's still asking for everything. And I know I have stepped off one of the 2 boards I serve on. I have removed myself from a number of other situations where I have said I do not have the capacity, and I've never experienced anything like this where I've said no more often than yes. I have to practice it and use my husband a lot, and I go back to when I fostered, I would say yes to every kid. And my husband would say, yeah, actually that one doesn't fit our family. And I'm relying a lot upon him right now to be my right hand and my emotional regulator to do a lot of that work with me. So think about resiliency that way. What does it look like for you? What do you need to be resilient? Bearing in mind that these are some of the themes that we're experiencing. So my practice is around this, and this is kind of how I've really encouraged people to think. How can you reframe your thoughts? How can you look at things from a different perspective? This is not about minimizing what you're experiencing. This is about emphasizing that, and I think as high-performing individuals, we often say, well, I should. I have all this privilege, and that's a great thing to recognize, that you have privilege, you have employment, you have maybe supportive partners, whatever that might look like, and maybe not. Maybe you have supportive friends, that's your thing. But right now, I want you to consider this as how I would reach out and support a friend is what I need to do for me and what I need to do to care for myself to get through this. And traditionally, and I'm very much aware that I've got a mixed audience here, but traditionally for women, we're not very good at that. We kind of are terrible at taking care of ourselves. And then the second part there about asking for help, and asking for help, whatever it may be, about that balance. Some workplaces have been really good about accommodating the transition. We recognize that people are at home. I love when small humans come on the screen, or their cat or their dog, and it makes me giggle when some cat comes on the screen and shows me their bum. But reality is that we're seeing a human side of each other that we haven't seen before in professional contexts. And that gives us opportunity to connect a little bit more, but also to pay attention to our boundaries and where our skills are and where they're not. So reframe your thoughts a little bit, seek some support. And this is the hard one. Focus on only what you can control and what's in your locus of control. I know that taking on the burden of how I care for other people, whether it be work or my personal life or friends and family that reach out for help, is really, really difficult for me. I find that I'm, as I said, not good at saying no. And I start to look at things as if it's 100% my responsibility, and it's not. So I've been doing a lot of practice around not just the lining up and organizing the tasks and the big things in my life, or putting it over a month and breaking it down. I've been creating another column when I look at this, and in that column I'm putting down there 3 different tiers: what I can control, what I might have some control over, and what I have none. And then I've been looking at those things as I start to ruminate and dwell on the things that are bugging me in my brain and keeping me awake at night. And I'm starting to compartmentalize and pull things out that are not within my control. I cannot control what the government does in terms of the public health standards, but I can practice what I believe is the right thing, which is wear a mask all times, minimize going out, wash, sanitize everything. And the reality is spending a lot of time on Facebook judging other people right now for their inability to follow those regulations. I have a lot of judgment happening in my mind. Luckily, I'm keeping it behind me. So I want to go back to it just quickly. That reframe your thoughts. When you are resilient, when you're able to pull in those resiliency skills, you're able to look at those negative experiences realistically, but one that doesn't center on blame, and you don't brood about it, about things that you can't change, obviously. And instead of looking at it as insurmountable, looking for those small ways that you can tackle the problem and make changes that will help. Focusing on the positive things you can do to help get out of the negative mindset, because that's where we're stuck, is the negative mindset. On that support side, making sure that you have people you trust and you can confide in is super important for resiliency. It's not something you can do on your own. You actually need some support with it. Talking about the difficulties with the right people meaning the ones that will support you and not judge you or problem solve for you. That's one of my things that I know I hate the most, is when I talk to someone about what's going on for me, and either they try and one-up me or they try and offer me their solution and their advice. I don't want advice from anyone. What I want is someone to validate and hear what's going on for me, and then I'm okay with them sharing what's going on for them, but I need some validation for what I'm experiencing. So bear that in mind when you choose who to talk with and confide in. But it also helps gain some insight, like this kind of gathering, where you realize it's not just you. And it's not just you facing these challenges. And we are kind of socialized as Canadians, and then I think the women's side a little bit more, to be the helper, not the helpee, not to be the one asking. And that focus of control, really for me, it's about choosing what you can pay attention to and what you can't. I know that I have a lot of problems myself, or a lot of challenges with rumination and putting thoughts into my head and playing with them over and over and over again, and not being able to let go. And the only thing that ever gets me out of it is, one of my therapists actually said to me, she said, "Do you understand where resilience comes from, where that word comes from?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, when you think about resilient, it's actually, think of an animal that chews its cud like a cow. And we hear about them throwing it up and putting it in another part of their stomach, another stomach. Well, that's what's called the rumen of their stomach. And that's where the word rumination comes from. And all of a sudden I had this picture in my head of my brain vomiting. And my brain was vomiting all the negative things, and I was focusing on them. I was like, oh, that's disgusting. And from that came this ability to say, okay, when I started to fixate on something, I went back to, okay, you're vomiting in your head, stop it. And that was able to take me out of it, because it was shocking to me that I had that experience going on. So really picking what I can change and what I can't. Trust me, this works really well with in-laws and this works really well with people in your life that you have to have there, but have some toxicity to them as well, is choosing what you can control and not control, and then modeling it when you have the capacity, modeling it going forward. But here's the kicker, guys. You have to practice self-compassion. You must do this. And you practice saying no. And I equate this all the time to remember when we used to take planes, that time, when you would get on an airplane to travel somewhere and the flight attendant would say, in case of an emergency and your oxygen mask should descend from above, please put it over your face first before you put it over someone who's more vulnerable who needs your help. As the mother of 50 people, I would probably have a challenge with that. I'd probably stick it over a small human first. But through the pandemic, when it comes to my mental health, this is what I'm practicing the most. And I'm doing it in increments every day. I have to actually schedule it. That's how difficult it is for me to do it. It's in my calendar in the morning to practice 10 to 15 minutes of self-compassion or self-care. And it's in my practice in my calendar in the evening to do it again. I will say most days I only do one. And I try very hard to have it be the one in the morning, because that's the point that gives me the energy to get through the rest of the day and to compartmentalize and to not be doing that mental vomit into my head about things I can't change. Self-compassion, I think, is something that is very unusual language for us. We talk about self-care and we recognize that things like exercise are important for self-care. But that self-compassion is really looking at yourself and not just owning the fact that you feel like shit right now and you can't seem to change that. And there's so many things going on that are out of your locus of control. But it's being compassionate with yourself and saying, it's okay. It's okay that you broke down in tears 3 times this week. It's okay that you yelled at your kids and had to go back and apologize because you knew that wasn't you. It's the stress in your life. And it's okay if something else in your life is falling apart right now, and probably not due to the pandemic, but it's another layer of complication. And to give yourself the ability to feel it, to give yourself the ability to own it, and the ability to be kind to yourself and say it's okay. And this is the biggest challenge I have found, and I have seen over and over again during COVID times particularly, is everyone rushing to try and solve and move forward, and nobody's taking the time to care for themselves. So mine right now, I love that it's spring. I have a beautiful patio outside. My husband and I have cleaned it up. We haven't started the fountain yet, but I am looking forward to, in my mornings, spending 20 minutes outside, feeding my birds and the squirrels. That really ticks my neighbors off, but I don't care. Feeding the birds and the squirrels, sitting there for 15 minutes with a latte and watching them and doing nothing else. No phone, no computer. And that's a way to slow my brain down. On the flip side, at the end of the day, usually there's wine, it's sitting down again on the patio with my husband and talking about my day, because my husband's not working right now. His business doesn't work in the wintertime. And for me to be able to tell him about my day and have a separation from my work environment and my home environment, even though they're all in one specific place at the same time. So really practicing that. What do I need for caring for myself? And what do I need in the persons in my life for them to help care for me too? And asking for that continued support. Everybody who is still working hopefully has some form of an EAP, an EFP program, something where you have supports. Most of them include psychological assistance, and frequently, like I said, you might need some extra help with the medications. But I always like to throw out what's out there that's on the free side of things, because it may be someone in your life that you're helping. It may be someone out there that you know that they're struggling in ways that you can't imagine. And it's being able to say, hey, I heard about this, or there's this particular one available that's free of charge. So that's why I love to throw up the things up there. Some of those are obviously health region things, but the other ones are some local support places that they can get some assistance during this time. I always throw up our social media, and this is not so I can gain 9,000 more followers. It's actually so that when you share what's happening in our community, you become instantly a safe person for someone to talk to about your mental health. And the best way I can say this is right now, I did not watch the Harry and Meghan interview on Oprah on purpose, but the takeaways from it for me was that, hey, this is a dysfunctional family like the rest of us. They don't put fun in it. I always describe my family as putting the fun in dysfunctional. But the thing that was missed the most in there was that that was a woman who disclosed that she had suicidal ideation, was struggling with mental health, a lot of it postpartum related, and not very many people picked up on that. And the one thing I took away is that lots of people were posting that they didn't like what Meghan had to say. They didn't believe much of the things. And someone actually did a tweet that I thought was fantastic, where she said, you know what, Meghan Markle's never going to read what you posted, but your friends are going to read what you posted. and they're never going to come to you if they have suicidal ideation, or they're having thoughts of self-harm, or they're simply struggling like we all are. They're not going to come to you and ask for help because you made a statement about someone else's mental health. So for me, this is about knowing that you're friendly to go to, that you are someone who understands and has empathy. And if you don't, you're someone who'll connect them with. And that's the most important thing. I hope some of these things are useful. Whenever I do a presentation, I don't like to call them lunch and learns or anything like that. But my goal when I do presentations is 3 things. I want to be generous with my time. I want to be generous with my experiences and my vulnerability. I hope that I can offer you something new and something valuable. And today, the big one I want you to take away is understanding that we're all in grief and loss, every single one of us, and that we all need to practice self-compassion. I think that's a critical one. Every presentation to me, there should be either a new idea, some new information, or some inspiration. I know that I hear so many people and so many other folks that are doing some amazing things in their lives. And I've had people tell me that I'm inspirational because I've done all the fostering and done all those things. They're like, oh, I could never be like you. And my response to that is, you are like me. We're all like each other. We all have something that we're fantastic at. We all have some place where we give our volunteer time or our generosity of whatever it might be. I'm not exceptional. I'm one of you. You're one of me. We're all the same, and everybody's having a tough time right now. So if nothing else, my big reach to you is reach out today and ask someone, not how are you, and how are you doing? And how are you doing today? Make sure that you're paying attention to the signals that you might see and being okay with asking those questions, knowing that you might get a tougher answer than you ever had before. Not everybody's responding with, I'm fine. How are you? Some of us actually have some other stuff going on in the background that needs to be addressed. So I'm going to leave it there and stop sharing my screen. I'm trying to figure out the protocols here. I know that some questions could have been answered during the presentation that you may wish addressed. And I hope that you have some. If not, ask away about anything that you might want to know about Karen and her strange life. Katrina, I think it's you. Are you muted?
Sorry, I always have to unmute myself twice. It's not ineptitude. It's actually complicated, I swear. We do have a number of questions, but just a quick note, we will be sharing slides afterwards, and we'll also, as this presentation is recorded, we'll also share a recording of the presentation, which will be available on DLA Piper's which will be sent out through DLA Piper's website, and also will be available on Women+Power's website. And we'll provide you with the link to that at the end of this presentation. The first question that we have from the audience is, what if I'm struggling at work and I don't feel like it's a safe place to speak up?
Oh boy. Well, there's a lot of lawyers here, and they can tell you have some rights about that in employment standards. I'll put it that way. But I kind of get the safety factor. I think the number one thing is that if you're struggling at work, first you need to check in with your own mental health and see what's going on for you, because the strength in dealing with something that is a challenge might need to be assessed first by a doctor. I always send people to their doctors. Go see your doctor, tell them a little about what's going on, see if they have any strategies for your mental health right now, and check on that. When there is something happening that you don't feel safe to go through work, and I've seen this a number of times, you might be your chance not so much to consult legal advice at this particular point, but to do some research into the employment standards side of things. But that can be really overwhelming for most people. So finding someone in your life, in another company, one of your connections on LinkedIn that you know that might have been experiencing things like that, people that you trust, I think is a good place to start and to consult. But my second half of that is, what's making you feel unsafe? Has there been a history in that organization of punitive behavior if someone discloses? Has there been things like that have happened before you? Because that's a big red flag for lots of us. And I compare it right now to what's happening in the military with the investigations on particularly sexual assault within the military, but also other kinds of abusive behavior where there's an entrenched system and a hierarchy that gives the folks that are higher levels, an ability to demand and command. We don't live with that in most of our workplaces, at least I hope not. So recognizing that there are some rights involved with there and doing a little homework, but most importantly, paying attention to you and what's important for you. I'm not adverse to folks going after their employers at some point if they're really in a toxic environment, because I think that if you're experiencing it, someone else is too. And you have an obligation to sort of step up and do something. So I hope that answers it a little bit. Again, not a lawyer. There's lots in here who could offer you that advice. But I do think you don't let it go. Mute.
There we go. That better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm stopping muting.
Yes.
What are some opening lines I can use to approach a friend or coworker who is struggling?
I love that question. I'm very big on observational conversation. So it's, if you notice that someone's struggling, what are the things that you're noticing? What are the behaviors that you're noticing? And so eliminating the question of how are you and moving towards a, hey, I've noticed that, I've observed that, and make sure that the observation is about not a weakness in them or not something that they would consider a challenge, but something in them that you want to do to support. I've noticed lately that you've been attending the Zoom meetings and you're turning your camera off a lot. Is there something going on that you need to talk about or that you might need some support with? And it could be simply, I know I'm tired of looking at myself in a camera, and there's a lot of mental health stress around that side of things. It's not that everyone else is watching me, it's that I'm watching me. And so if you observe that, making a comment about it and then leaving it open, an open-ended question. So I'm very big on observational behavior and then saying, you know, is there anything I can do to support you? You may have to do it more than once, and you may not be that colleague that they're going to disclose to. But I think it is being generally a little bit consistent and a tiny bit persistent in asking those overarching questions. If it's at a point when it's affecting their ability to work and you're their supervisor particularly, ensuring that they know that this is not a performance conversation, that this is a conversation from person to person about your wellness. So always go with observational versus you know, declaring something, you're being this. Instead, it's I've noticed that, I've observed that, I wonder if.
And then we're a little bit short on time, but I have one more great question that ties in quite well to that. How would you approach a partner or superior in a way that isn't criticizing, to ask for support in a way that doesn't make them defensive?
Well, start with the layer that we're all struggling. I think that that's the biggest thing. And I have to address that in myself all the time because I notice my judgment is really high right now. I'm generally taking it out on private people or sorry, public people, where I'm in a grocery store, someone's going the wrong way down an aisle and I'm reacting in my head about why don't you follow the arrows? Where's your why is your mask not over your nose and that, and then stepping back and saying, you know what? I have no idea what their day's like. I have no idea where they've been. So I actually strangely start with the empathy for the boss. And the empathy is that we're all in this together. They might not be paying attention to it. So I would encourage folks to be able to say, hey, have a conversation about how we're all struggling. Some of the things you might have learned today about grief and loss. The fact that everyone's struggling with mental health, not mental illness, their mental health. And then if you can get a dialogue like that going, then you have an opportunity to figure out where they're at on that spectrum, where they are in acceptance, and then shift it into, you know, how you might need some different support than others. And maybe it's whatever it is, modified work hours, some time off. We're seeing a massive increase in that. It's most companies that have employee assistance programs, there used to be their #1 claim on short-term disability was musculoskeletal. Their #1 claim right now is mental health and rising. So that's something that we're seeing in the work environment. So your superiors, your bosses, they're not gonna, if they're paying any attention to what's happening in the world, they have to recognize that that's reality. That's reality for what we're doing and where we are. But start it softly. I'm always a big believer that you get, what's the expression? You get more flies with honey than vinegar. Start off with the softness and the empathy before you move into what I need for my capacity.
All right, well, thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Shar to do our wrap up.
Can I just say one more thing quickly? My name's a long one. There's not many people with my name, I don't think, that are hyphenated. I always encourage people, if you have a question outside of this, or you need some support outside of this, please feel free to contact me through LinkedIn. I will give you my work email, things like that. But if you're not comfortable asking questions or anything here, please do not hesitate to reach out. I will respond to any request on LinkedIn that needs any help and ensure that I can connect you with the right services.
Thank you, Karen. And I can vouch for that because I did reach out to you after the last session, and we've been talking since then, and I appreciate that. I'll start with apologizing. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, and I'm not the most technologically sound person, so probably on my end for not sharing those slides at the very beginning. I've kind of walked through them here recently, and as Katrina mentioned, we can add these to the slides that Karen's presented to you today. One of my favorites, my personal favorites, Karen, is your graph. I felt validated and understood when I saw that for the first time. So I hope everybody that is here today has had some learnings from that as well. But I did want to thank you especially for your support today and for taking the time out of your busy and your day off, as you mentioned earlier, to be with us today and to share some of your experiences. Much appreciated, and I hope that we can continue working with you as we go forward. I'd like to thank our participants for being here today. I didn't get a chance to do that at the outset as well with the technology issues that we had. Our moderators, Ms. Katrina and Heather from DLA Piper, and DLA Piper as our title sponsor for sponsoring this event. And then lastly, and not least, our members for supporting us. And those are, you know, from our newsletter followers to our social media platform followers. Very much appreciate the support that you've given us as we've grown our membership over the last year or so. And ask you, I've just got one last slide. I'm just putting some information up here for you to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. Feedback and suggestions, feedback on this event, suggestions for future events. We've got some volunteer opportunities that we'd love to talk to you about. Sponsorship opportunities, obviously ongoing, and you can visit our website to become a member. And our website's there listed at the bottom. So follow our website and social media platforms for ongoing engagement and for updates on upcoming events.
And just in case folks can't see the slides, because I know I can't again, it's womenpower.ca is our website, and all of our media is linked to the website.
Now,
there we go, that's better. And this information will also be available on our mail out following the session.
wonderful. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for attending.